Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the children who have lost limbs in Israel's war on Gaza.
There will be children who survive, and that will be the longest shadow of this war in the end.
The story of one young girl whose amputation has taken her from Gaza to the U.S., and what it reveals about the long road ahead for thousands like her. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
Today, of course, I got ready for school.
Leyan is 13 years old. And before October 7th, 2023, she was just like any other kid. She loved fashion, and you could find her on social media, posting fit checks. Leanne was a popular kid at school. Her mom described her as a butterfly.
She was very active and didn't like to stay still.
After October 7th, Leyanne and her family were sheltering in a tent at what used to be a school in central Gaza.
I was playing in the tent, playing like any child. Suddenly, we heard a huge explosion.
Israel had launched an artillery strike on a nearby mosque. Leyanne's brother and her dad found her face down outside of their tent.
Here, the shrapnel went through here and hit Leyan's leg. I found Leyan on the ground. I approached and asked her, "Are you awake, sweetie?" Leyan was not aware of what happened to her. The first thing I saw was that she was bleeding in the neck area towards the middle of her back. The wound in her leg was severe. It was in two spots, her thigh and under the knee.
Leyanne was rushed to the ICU at the Al-Aqsa hospital. Her leg had been almost completely severed. It was swollen, turning black and blue, and she had a high fever. But the hospital didn't have the equipment they needed for surgery. That's when Leyanne's family turned to social media to help get her out of Gaza.
I'm 12 years old. Instead of being upset over a toy, I'm upset about my leg, which is rotting before my eyes.
Leyanne was evacuated from Gaza into Egypt last December. Her story is at the center of a new Fault Lines documentary. My guest is the filmmaker behind it.
My name is Rhana Natour, and I'm the director and producer of the Fault Lines film, All That Remains.
Rhana, welcome back to The Take. You met Leyanne in Egypt after she had safely gotten out of Gaza. She was hoping that doctors in Egypt would be able to salvage her leg. What happened?
They get to Egypt, and essentially it was too late. Gangrene, an infection, had spread throughout her leg and was about to spread into her body, and that would have killed her. The family very initially had a lot of trouble with the news that they would have to amputate her leg. They tried to go to multiple hospitals, and the doctors in Egypt really had to negotiate for hours, begging Ragda, Leanne's mom, to sign on the consent form for amputation. And I think in the film, you get an up-close and personal look on how traumatizing this is for the adults that have to sign the consent to amputate their children's limbs, and how the children react when they wake up for the surgery. So after a tremendous effort to try to get her out of Gaza, which is very, very difficult, very few children are able to do that, they got really devastating news in Egypt. And that's where we kind of press play in the film. What happens after that?
Rhana, you mentioned the effect this has on kids when they wake up and realize their leg has been amputated. And that elucidates one of the most touching parts of this part of the film, which is Leyanne's mother making this difficult decision, but us as the viewers realizing Leyanne doesn't know about the decision. And she goes into surgery not knowing that her leg is going to have to be amputated. Can you walk us through what that was like?
That was one of the most incredible revelations when I was getting to know Leanne's story and speaking with her mom and her parents. In any other circumstance, there would be psychologists, there would be social workers, there would be therapists. And really, the mom had no tools in her tool belt to be able to have a conversation with her child about it. She was just reeling from this. And she explained to me, how am I supposed to tell my child when I can't quite believe it, when I can't quite absorb it?
I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell her at all. I didn't know what to tell her. What could I have told her? She went into surgery without me telling her. I couldn't tell her that they were going to amputate her leg.
So this is also a story of forgiveness. Leanne had to forgive a lot of adults for not being able to protect her. They couldn't. And initially, there was blame that she put on her mother. And I think we can see how the guilt of that plays throughout the film. And one of the things that I could not forget is that when Leanne woke up from the surgery, she looked at her mom. She's like, why did you let them do this to me? And then her mom said, I'll be your hands. I'll be your legs. So we see the way that parents have to really show up for their children after this. And I think it's a very touching portrait because they really do show up.
You mentioned that there's often no one standing by to walk them through this. But they're also very much not alone, and that will come as no solace to any of them, because Leyan is one of at least 1,000 Palestinian kids who lost one or both of their legs from last October to January of this year, and that's according to UNICEF. Over a year in, as of now, how complete is that picture?
The picture we have is incomplete. That statistic that you just read, that's the only statistic we have. But I want to put that statistic another way, because Gaza is a small place. It's about the size of Philadelphia. That's as if every single student in an entire high school in the city the size of Philadelphia lost a limb in the first 60 days of their semester. And the war continued after that. So in the film, we speak to Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta. He's a surgeon who did a 43-day stint in Gaza shortly after the war began. And he estimates that we're looking at 4,000 children who have lost a limb. And that's when I spoke to him back in June, July. Wow. So not only is it tragic, but it also happened incredibly fast and happened in a very geographically concentrated area.
You mentioned Dr. Abu Sitta, who's been trying to get a more accurate picture, who's been tracking a trend, really. Can you tell me about what that effort has looked like?
This was a real personal quest for him because he was just gathering anecdotal data because he wanted to confirm whether what he experienced was being experienced by other doctors. He told me that in 43 days in Gaza, he did more amputations than he did in his entire 20-year career. And this is a man who goes to conflict zones. He would call around to other surgeons, hey, is this what you're experiencing? Is this what you're experiencing, nurse? Is this what you're experiencing, hospital director? And everyone came back with the same insight. I've never done so many amputations. I've never done so many amputations on children. And he really is now focused on gathering resources for these kids. And something that I think we need to remember, we're still reeling over 16,000 children who died. Yeah. The world is still reeling. We're all individually still trying to wrap our heads around that. But there will be children who survive. And that will be the longest shadow of this war in the end. And children who survive without a limb and who survive with a disability, they're going to need an incredible amount of medical attention in order to live their lives.
After the break, why for a child, an amputation is so much more than a physical loss. You've explained the scale of what we're looking at here in Gaza. So I want to use that to return to Leyanne's story, because shortly after her leg was amputated in Egypt, her brother, who had campaigned for her on social media to get to Egypt in the first place, started another social media campaign to help her leave again, because as you said, there is a need for continuing care, and that's the case for Leyan as well. So months later, with the help of an organization called Heal Palestine, Leyan is on her way to the U.S. with her mother, Ragda.
أنا رايحة في ولاية فيلادلفيا في أمريكا. I'm going to Philadelphia in the United States. أنا بتمنى إنه يقدروا إنه يعالجوا رجلي I hope they can treat my leg and give me a prosthetic to help me stand up again.
And in the film, she seems really excited about the trip. You can tell because she's picked out her shoes, she's picked out an outfit. But when she and her mother land in the airport, there is a throng of people who are waiting to greet them with balloons and gifts and flowers. They're cheering, they're holding up signs. Their reaction, as we as viewers see it, is pretty subdued. What was that moment actually like? Because you and your team were there too. What was it like for you, and what was it like for them?
You're right, Malika. She was very excited. And we knew that she was excited about it. And I was surprised at the subdued reaction. But after I went home that night and I was back at my hotel chewing it over, I thought, well, of course her reaction was subdued, because there are thousands of kids, many who she knows, who don't have this opportunity. She's even farther from everyone she ever knew. And she's here because the worst thing that has ever happened to her has happened to her. Her mother left behind all her kids, including an 8-year-old boy who really needs her and really wants her around. And she's never left Gaza. And now she's farther from these loved ones. And she doesn't know if she'll come back. We don't know what the end result will be for these families that are separated. So she is also sad to be here. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to leave Gaza, but she wanted to give her child the best shot at a future. So the happiness that we see is almost our own guilt. It's almost our own. We're happy because we can help a child, but we also know that there are thousands that we can't help. So the happiness is really our happiness.
Yeah, I mean, it's palpable in the film because just in describing that moment, you really see jubilation. You see the cheering sounds like a hero's welcome home, but this isn't home. And it's because of a tragic circumstance, and they left their family behind. So there is this discrepancy, this weird juxtaposition happening in the airport at that same time that we as the viewers are feeling as well.
Exactly.
I think a lot of people who watch this documentary will probably be struck by Leyanne's resiliency, as I was. How someone so young manages to stay positive despite her circumstances. And I imagine that has to be exhausting, but you see her calling on her faith. You see her accepting the circumstances that she's in.
After that, it was over. I thought this is God's will, and we need to be patient. I believe God will reward me for this loss, and hopefully my leg will be in heaven.
Was that true off camera as well? Because I imagine there must be moments where you and your filmmaking crew and Leyanne and her mother are there without the cameras rolling that don't feel so resilient.
When I first started reporting on this film and Leanne's story, I thought this was a story about a girl who wanted to walk again. But I soon realized that this was actually about protecting this amazing girl's spirit, to make sure that this amazing, effervescent spirit of a young girl stays that way, and that this tragedy doesn't destroy that. And she doesn't want that to be destroyed. So what you saw of Leanne is true off camera. She is this really excitable, joyous young girl, but she has hard days. She has very, very, very hard days. we don't film with her on those days because she wants to be alone. She doesn't want anybody watching her, looking at her. She doesn't want to interact with anybody. It's like any trauma. It's like surviving anything. You have good days where you think you can face it head on, and you have really terrible days when you think, how am I going to scale this mountain?
Mm. So we won't give away what happens to Leyan because we want people to watch the documentary. But the film and your reporting touch on how the journey of kids whose limbs are amputated doesn't end once they get a prosthetic. What did you learn about what their lives look like after that point, whether it's physically or psychologically?
I really thought that the biggest challenge was to get these kids a prosthetic limb. And I learned very, very soon, as I began reporting on this issue, that the mountain is much higher than that.
Mm.
Walking on prosthetic legs for a child or an adult who's experienced a blast injury or crush injury, such as what happens in this war, it can be like walking on the most uncomfortable pair of shoes you've ever put on. But
Wow.
You can't take those shoes off. It's very painful because you have a limb that's been eviscerated. That's bone, tissue, skin. And there's a specialist for each of those things. And all of those things have to work together in order for you to walk on a prosthetic. And it's also important that they have continuity of care. You can't, when you're an amputee, you can't just hop from one doctor to the other. These doctors have to really know you. And an injured child still grows. That's the part that makes pediatric amputees very different than adult amputees. You're dealing with an injured limb that's growing. So on average, this child will have to have 9 to 12 surgeries until they reach adult age in order to be able to accommodate a prosthetic. And you can't leave the country and where you're from every time you need these surgeries. It has to be done where you live. And we really have to understand that. And also, these prosthetics, if a child with a prosthetic will return to Gaza today, where 70% of the infrastructure has been destroyed and is rubble, their prosthetic will break down in a matter of days. It won't work.
Rhana, you mentioned the need for a new prosthetic every few months or so for kids because their limbs are still growing. You mentioned the need for a new prosthetic if and when a child goes back to Gaza with it and is walking on this uneven rubble of what used to be the sidewalk of their homes. How would that work? Because Gaza doesn't have that infrastructure and likely won't have that infrastructure for a very long time.
Something that Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta told me this summer was that Gaza will have to be reimagined and rebuilt as completely handicap accessible, because we're not only talking about a generation of children who are disabled, we're talking about a new generation of adults. So the rebuilding phase will have to accommodate this reality. I don't know if it will, I don't know if it can, but that's the kind of thinking that needs to change here. And another thing that is being worked on is because this cohort is so big, we're going to have to reimagine prosthetics. There's a center in London called the Center for Pediatric Blast Studies that is looking at creating a prosthetic that grows with the child.
Wow.
And that is the kind of reimagination that will have to happen to accommodate this incredibly large cohort of pediatric amputees.
You know, Rhana, this is a very heavy conversation, and it was a heavy documentary to watch. But there's also a thread of what could be. I don't even know if I can call it hope, but there is a thread of light. And a lot of that comes from Leanne herself and watching her go through this. Having spent time with her and her family, what do you take away most from your time with them?
What I take away most from my time with Leanne is that children can be incredibly resilient. The degree of resiliency that I saw in Leanne and her family floored me. Their spirit and the way that children are programmed, their resiliency is already there. the more tools they have to tap into that, the better their outcomes will be. The fact that Leanne is safe, physically safe, and doesn't have to worry about surviving another day in Gaza. The fact that Leanne has consistent medical care with a consistent group of specialists who care about these outcomes and who aren't overwhelmed with thousands of other amputees also is another tool that allows her to be resilient. So the fact that she has a present parent who's alive, that all of that contributes to how well Leanne can tap into her resiliency. And I wish that for as many kids as possible. But I think what we see in this film is the degree to which the foundation of resiliency is already there in every human being, and especially every human child. I mean, they want a future. They want to live their lives. They don't want their lives to have to go unlived. They will do everything they can, and it's up to the adults, the adult world, so to speak, to try to give them those tools. They can't help themselves. They need help from outside forces.
And that's The Take. To watch the documentary, All That Remains, and find out what happens to Leyanne, check the show description below for the link. We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions about today's episode, so let's keep the conversation going. We'll see you tomorrow.